Hey, Harmony Life Groups, welcome to our third session as we have been taking a look at Daniel, a series that we've been calling Stand, and a look into the life of Daniel. Over the last couple of sessions, Pastor John and I have been looking at different topics such as standing in truth, standing even when it costs you, and today we're going to be looking at a very important topic, standing in prayer.
So, as we talk about standing in prayer, let me ask you this. Why do you feel like prayer is a very important topic, a very important habit in the life of a believer?
Well, I mean, obviously, the Apostle Paul made it clear that if we are to call ourselves apostles of Jesus and disciples of Jesus, then we need to be constantly in prayer. We need to be constantly seeking not only wisdom from the Lord, but seeking His voice and seeking guidance from Him.
So, today, as we talk about prayer, I want to encourage you right now to begin thinking about the habit of prayer in your life. Where are you at with that habit? Would you say that you pray effectively? Would you pray? Would you say that you pray enough? Right? I know that we probably all could say no. We probably could never pray enough. We've got a little ways to go. Maybe prayer is a habit in your life where you're spending a few minutes each day. Maybe today I would just challenge you at the outset of this video to begin thinking about how you can spend more time in prayer, how you can work prayer into your life. In fact, maybe that's something that you share among the group when we have an opportunity to discuss just some basic ways of how you can share prayer in your life and do it in a more effective aspect. One of the reasons I think we need to be spending time in prayer comes from a statement that I read from the Denison Forum. And actually, as we were putting this series together, I came across it just before I spoke the weekend of this topic of prayer. And the Denison Forum put out a statement that just simply says, darkness cannot drive out darkness. Now, that doesn't sound like a lot of wisdom in that statement, right? It seems like it's rather obvious, but if we're going to drive out darkness, number one, there has to be light. And number two, if we're going to be people that drive out darkness, we have to have something that's fueling that. And that's where prayer kicks in. When you look at the times that Daniel has prayed, as we look in the scriptures, what are some important things that stand out to you as far as prayer in the life of Daniel before we dig into the topic today?
Well, something about Daniel is he doesn't hide his prayer life, right? He doesn't kind of hide in the corner. He's very public about it. He's very consistent with his life and his prayer life and his willingness to talk to the Lord, even in situations where it seems like, like we've talked about in previous weeks, when it seems like he's on his own, he is speaking to the Lord, trusting in Him and in His timing.
So yes, and he's praying, and he's not doing it in an antagonistic way. Yet he's doing it in a very basic way. Just a quick recap of where we're at in Daniel. Remember, Daniel chapter 1 records Nebuchadnezzar coming and besieging Jerusalem, right? Taking it over, just kind of bringing it to ruins, taking the people captive. Now, keep in mind that most likely they would have eliminated many of the adult males. They would have taken captive the women and children, and probably eliminated many of the women as well. The goal was to take the people over, eliminate as many as possible, and then they relocated many of them 900 miles away from home. And that's where we find Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Those are Daniel and his three Hebrew friends that we read quite a bit about in the book of Daniel. In that time, we know that Nebuchadnezzar makes a decree, and he makes it his goal to change their identity. Right away, he takes their names from having meaning for God to change their names, change their identity, and try and take some of that meaning away and give them names that represent many other gods or cultural icons of their day. So he changes their identity, or attempts to. Then he attempts to change their behavior with the diet of what they were feeding them. And then he says, we want to re-educate you. We want to educate you according to our ways. So in the midst of that setting, 900 miles away from home, your identity being changed, your behavior being changed, and some of your beliefs being attempted to be reshaped and reformed, conformed to a culture of Nebuchadnezzar's world, Daniel and his friends say, look, we're not going to go ahead and give in to this. And one of the things that Daniel does is he demonstrates throughout that he is a person of prayer. Now, one of the things that we look at as we dig into this passage of scripture is found in Daniel chapter 1. Remember, Daniel chapter 1, verse number 8, but Daniel purposed in his heart. As we look at Daniel purposing in his heart, we're going to go a little further and we're going to look at what happens in the life of Daniel in Daniel chapter 1, verse number 8. We're going to jump ahead to Daniel chapter 6 in the first three verses. Daniel 1:8, he purposes in his heart. He begins to live some things out. Daniel chapter 6, the first three verses is where we're going to jump off in this session. It says this: It pleased Darius to set over the kingdom 120 satraps to be over the whole kingdom, and over these three governors, of whom Daniel was one, that the satraps might give account to them, so that the king would suffer no loss. Then Daniel distinguished himself above the governors and satraps, because an excellent spirit was in him, and the king gave thought to setting him over the whole realm. You talk about a promotion, right? I mean, Daniel is now serving another king. In the life of Daniel, he would go on to serve through four kings, I believe, which was very unusual in his day. But Daniel gave himself to a habit of prayer, and prayer is extremely important for multiple reasons. And one of the things that we talked about in this message was this: when God raises you up, others will tear you down. In the verses that follow, verse number 3, you're going to see people that Daniel walked among, people that Daniel worked with, people that Daniel looked out for, begin to attempt to tear him down. It's important that we realize that prayer will strengthen us when other people are trying to tear us down. So, Ian, for just a moment, what are your thoughts about the statement, when God raises you up, others will tear you down?
I mean, yeah, exactly right. I mean, any situation where you are relying on God, and obviously there's some spiritual warfare going on in that too. But anytime that you are relying on God, there's going to be somebody, some force that is trying to keep you away from God. You know, it's the evil one is not happy when you are being drawn closer to the Lord, so he tries to push you away from Him. So obviously, there are many different ways that happens, and when people see this happen, obviously that's when that comes into play.
So you right away mentioned the evil one, right? Because the evil one, Satan, he doesn't want us to have the strength to stand, and he doesn't want us to be encouraged. He is going to do what he can to discourage us, and he often uses other people, right? Because people are an instrument. People can be utilized by God, and often we fail to realize that we're in a spiritual battle, and many times people that are in our life, when they see us being raised up by God, or God blessing us, or an opportunity coming open for us, and many times there's a jealousy, there is a discontent. They don't want us to get ahead of them, whatever it might be. And again, our enemy begins to use them to make a difference for a negative impact in our life. One of the things that we see about the life of Daniel is this, right? Um, Daniel lived a life that we could say was kind of blameless, right? At this point in time, Daniel has been serving about 50 years. And as you read through the text, you're going to discover that they couldn't find anything wrong with Daniel. So what did they do? They began to tear him down because he was a person of prayer. I want to tell you something. I wish that that's all people could find on me, right? They would say, wow, it's against the law to pray, and John prays too much. Wouldn't that be an incredible place to live, right? Nope. The only thing we can accuse him of is he prays too much. Well, one of the things about Daniel's life is this. We said in the message that Daniel would kneel to pray for the strength to stand. Why does prayer strengthen our life? And why is it important that we have that?
Well, when we rely on our own strength, that's when we fall, right? Because when we rely on our own strength, that's when we are inclined to sin. That's when we are inclined to, kind of walk away from God. Real strength doesn't come from anything that we have to offer. Like you said, you wish that the only thing people could accuse you of was praying too much, right? If that's all we had to be accused of, then we'd be doing pretty good. But the reality is, when we rely on our own abilities, that's when we fall into temptation and sin. And it is through prayer and it is through relationship with God and with Jesus that we are able to kind of reject these and through that be able to be built up and gain strength.
So Daniel kneels to pray for the strength to stand. I love a quote that I want to share with you, and it's from the life of Adoniram Judson, and it comes from Prayer, the Timeless Secret of High Impact Leaders, and it's found on page 113. And on page 113, here's what had happened. Uh, Adoniram Judson went to the mission field, and he was in a land where there were millions. They labored 6 long, soul-crushing years that were just filled with heartbreak. On the mission field, and he was attempting to master the Burmese language, and he didn't have any textbooks, but he suffered the untimely deaths of 2 wives, 3 children, and many coworkers. He was incarcerated for nearly 2 years in a less than ideal prison. He was emaciated, filthy, shackled, and hanging upside down most of the time. Yet, Judson persevered in his work for Christ. How did he do it? So, here's what he was asked by a well meaning individual when he returned to Boston. Do you think the prospects are bright for the speedy conversion of the heathen? And here's what Judson had to say: as bright as the promises of God. Now, today, there are more than 4 million Burmese believers. Now, how did Adoniram Judson do that? If you read about his life, it's obvious that Adoniram Judson was a person of prayer. And if you and I are going to be what God wants us to be, we have to become people of prayer. Daniel goes to the lion's den in Daniel chapter 6. You're going to have an opportunity to dig into that. But what does prayer do in his life prior to the lion's den? We discover that Daniel is protected in the lion's den. I firmly believe that Daniel was protected in the lion's den because God wanted him to be, but prayer was preparing him for that. Ian, do you got any insights on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty safe to say that if you were thrown into a literal pit filled with hungry lions, um, it's probably unlikely that your first thought's going to be, I need to pray, right? I mean, the reality is you're probably going to be trying to claw up the walls or even try to fight off the lions or maybe even just accept the reality that you're in. But that's not what Daniel did. Even in the midst of almost certain death, he was still praying to the Lord. He was praying because he trusted in him. And regardless of the outcome, he trusted in the Lord. So that's awesome to read about.
Well, and here's the thing. Daniel was praying prior to the lion's den. And here's a truth. When we're praying prior to the difficulty, chances are we're going to pray during the difficulty. That's why we need to become people of prayer. Remember, the Bible said that Daniel purposed in his heart, meaning he made up his mind prior to the situation, prior to the circumstance, that he was going to be what God wanted him to be. I can't emphasize enough, when we talk about the strength to stand in prayer, we have to become a person of prayer before the problem, right? Not just during the problem. So here's something that we see in the life of Daniel as well, and we wrap it up with this. Daniel possessed a bold faith. Um, when we look at Daniel's life, when he found out, hey, there's this thing that we're not supposed to pray, Daniel just continued to pray, and he didn't attempt to hide his prayer, but it wasn't an in your face type of setting, because Scripture gives us the idea in the context and setting that Daniel just continued to operate in his normal way. He was a person of bold faith. Remember, it was Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego that looked at a former king and said, look, God's going to take care of us, right? Even if he doesn't, he is going to be with us. Let me ask you something. How does prayer help us to have a bold faith?
Well, I mean, like I said earlier, when you are praying, you are relying on the Lord. You're listening for His voice. You're listening and seeking His guidance. So that gives you the boldness of someone who is following the Lord, right? A boldness that can only come from a relationship with God, and a boldness that can only come from God.
So Daniel possesses a bold, bold faith. Billy Graham made the statement that courage is contagious. I can't help but believe that when Daniel took a stand, the the courage that he took that stand with when he came out of the lion's den multiplied, right, not only among his life but among the life of the people around him. And we're talking about kings, we're talking about other people he was leading and serving, and he's impacting a nation in many ways. um, you know in the point of him entering the lion's den, I can't imagine what it would be like to take that walk. But Corey Ten Boom made this statement, and here's what she said: "You can never learn that Christ is all you need until Christ is all you have." And I think that Daniel knew at that point in time God was all he needed because God was all he had. I want to encourage you as we talk about the strength to stand and we talk about standing in prayer, think about some of these thoughts, dig in deeper, get into the text, and see how prayer can help you stand in the culture that we're in today.